All right, ready when you are, Chair Ortiz.
Perfect. I'm going to call the meeting to order. Good evening. This is the February 2022 meeting of the San Francisco County Transportation Authority Community Advisory Committee, or CAC. I'm Kevin Ortiz. I'm the chair of the CAC. Before I give the report, I'd like to ask Elijah Saunders, our clerk this evening, to do a roll call to make sure we have quorum, and then he will read an announcement about public comment for this virtual meeting format.
Thank you, Chair. Members of the CAC, when I say your name, please say present. Member Bars. Member Bars absent. Member Chen. Member Chen absent. Member Daniels. Member Daniels absent. Member Ho.
Ho present.
Ho present. Member Levine.
You're on mute.
Levine present. Sorry.
Present. No worries. Member Ortega.
Ortega present.
Ortega present. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz present.
Ortiz present. Member Roselle.
Roselle present.
Roselle present. Member Siegel.
Siegel present.
Siegel present. Chair, we have quorum.
Great. So this is going to be a really long meeting. It's packed with agenda items, so I do want to make sure that we can jump in as quickly as possible. So I'll breeze through my report.
Excuse me, Chair.
Yep.
I have a very brief public comment
Oh,
announcement.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, Elijah.
No worries at all. Public comment will be available for each item on this agenda via telephone by calling or one of the other numbers listed on the front of the agenda, or joining the meeting through the Zoom link. Once you join, you will be able to listen to the meeting as a participant. To make public comment on an item when the item is called, members of the public participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the raise hand feature or dial *9. Do not press *9 again, or you'll be removed from the queue. When you are asked to unmute yourself, press *6 or the unmute button to unmute yourself. The live operator will advise that you will be allowed 2 minutes to speak. When your 2 minutes are up, we'll move on to the next caller. Best practices are to speak slowly, clearly, and turn down the volume of any televisions or radios around you. Thank you. That concludes my announcement.
Thanks, Elijah. So really quickly, jumping into the chair's report, state lawmakers have announced the creation this week of a select committee in the state Senate to be chaired by Senator Scott Wiener that will focus on how to assist Bay Area public transit agencies that are still reeling from the COVID-19 pandemic. It is good that this issue is being elevated in Sacramento. At our last meeting, staff presented on the TA 2023 state and federal legislative program, and one of our main legislative goals is to secure state support to address the pending transit operations fiscal cliff. The Select Committee will hold its first hearing this coming Monday, February 23rd. At the February 28th meeting, the Transportation Authority Board will hear from BART, Caltrain, and SFMTA on each agency's financial outlook, including the timing and size of the projected operating deficits and what will be needed in the coming years to attract riders back and maintain service while the economy recovers and new post-pandemic travel patterns continue to evolve. I encourage folks to tune in to watch or view the video at sfgovtv.org. A reminder that this is expected to be our last fully virtual CAC meeting with the anticipated expiration of the governor's emergency health order at the end of the month. Our March 2022 meeting will be in person with opportunities for the public to participate and provide comment in person or remotely via Zoom. I'm looking forward to seeing folks in person next month, some of you for the first time. Relatedly, thank you to staff for adding a public comment timer that will be visible on the screen. Thank you to our public commenter for the suggestion as well. Regarding meeting management, I'd like to remind CAC members and presenters to wait until I call on you to speak, then speak slowly and clearly so that the audience can hear all discussions. Presenters, please only respond to questions if requested by the chair. CAC members and presenters, please turn off or silence all electronic devices and computer notifications during the meeting. Lastly, please keep your microphones on mute until the chair calls on you to speak. Really quickly as well too, since we do have a pretty heavy agenda as well too. I know questions were submitted ahead of time for these items. I do want to allow CAC members to have the opportunity to ask questions, but I'm going to be limiting questions to 1 minute per CAC member. Yeah, and now that that's it for announcements. Are there any questions or comments from CAC on the report? Seeing none, can we open it up to public comment? Do we have any public comment? Seeing none.
Hi,
Item- oh.
Actually- okay, guys. Hello? Hi. Can you guys hear me? My name is Hillary Brown. I'm with Urban Habitat. I'm here to participate and observe this meeting. I just want to share with this. I just want to share that.
Great. Thank you for joining us. I'm also, well, actually, do we have any other public comment?
I see no public comment for item 2.
Great. And I do want to acknowledge that Urban Habitat is here with their class today. I'll say that I'm proudly an Urban Habitat BCLI alumni. I learned some really great skills from them. And so excited to have you all here observing our very long meeting. So we're going to jump into the consent agenda. Items 3 through 5 comprise the consent agenda. Staff is not planning to present on these items. If a CAC member wishes, any of these items may be removed and considered separately. Do we have any folks that want to take any of the items off consent agenda from the CAC? Seeing none. Seeing none, do we have any public comment on the consent agenda?
Looking for public comments. Seeing no public comment for consent agenda.
Great. May I have a motion and a second to approve items 3 and 4 on the consent agenda?
This is Jerry Levine. I move approval of the consent agenda.
Great.
This is Rachel. Oh. I move to second.
Great. So we have a motion and a second. Can we take a roll call vote?
Yes, we can, Chair. On items 3 and 4 of the consent agenda, Member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Member Chen.
Chen, aye.
Chen, aye. Member Daniels. Daniels absent. Member Ho. Ho absent. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, I.
Ortega, aye. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz, aye.
Ortiz, aye. Member Roselle.
Roselle, aye.
Roselle, aye. Member Siegel.
Siegel, I.
Siegel, ayes. We have 7 ayes. Items 3 and 4 are approved.
Great. So now we're going to jump into the end of the consent agenda. And so jumping into a presentation on Visitation Valley and Portola Community-Based Transportation Plan update. And I want to apologize to Chris for having our meeting run a little bit long last time, but glad to have you here right at the top of the agenda. So I'm going to hand it over to you.
Good evening, everyone, and thanks so much, Chair Ortiz. I appreciate that. I had bedtime duties for my daughter last meeting, so thank you for making space for me this meeting. My name is Christopher Kidd. I'm a complete streets planner at the SFMTA in our planning subdivision and the project manager for the Viz Valley and Portola Community-Based Transportation Plan. I'll share my screen and run through this very quickly because I know you have a lot of business to conduct tonight. So looks like you all can see my screen now. So I'll move this forward. So a community-based transportation plan is kind of really, when you boil it down, is an attempt to create projects that are actively reflecting the values and the needs and challenges of a given community. This community-based transportation plan that we started in 2020 includes the neighborhoods of Portola, Viz Valley, Little Hollywood, and Sunnydale. It was funded through a Caltrans Sustainable Planning Grant with matching funds from the SFCTA with Prop K funds. We have just completed the final plan, which includes about $25 million in identified projects, a streetscape concept for Mansell Street, and a series of policy recommendations to reflect the other transportation needs that are not addressed through infrastructure. We had an enormous number of collaborators through this project, including Caltrans and the SFCTA, but also the offices of Supervisors Hillary Ronan and Shimon Walton, a lot of local neighborhood partners and organizations as well. And as part of that outreach and the outreach work that we did, which spanned over a full calendar year and 3 distinct phases of outreach, included paid contracted partnerships with the River of Life Church in Viz Valley and Family Connection Centers in the Portola. As part of our work, we committed ourselves to providing all of our project materials in 5 different languages, including Chinese, Spanish, Filipino, and Vietnamese. And in the workshop that we provided, we also provided simultaneous translation. During those 3 phases of public outreach, we engaged over 2,600 residents, which is very difficult to do during COVID, and collected almost 900 surveys and hundreds of written comments. I think telling, especially for this outreach work, is that from our survey results, it was more than 3/4 residents of color, and more than 60% of those people had incomes under $75,000 a year, which really meant that we were accurately representing the demographics of the community at large. During our first phase, we asked people to really prioritize their transportation priorities, as well as the streets and intersections that they wanted us to prioritize and focus on. This map shows the streets that people responded to the most, as well as the intersections with those orange circles. In our second phase, we took all of that input that we got around priorities and locations and turned them into a series of projects that we felt responded to those needs. We then brought that back to the public this past summer and allowed them to tell us which ones they liked, which they didn't, which we needed to remove, where we had projects missing. I think the telling thing out of all of that is that all the projects that we did solicit input on did receive a 50% or more favorable rating, but some much higher in favorability than others. During phase 3, we revisited and revised that project list into a final project list based on the input that we got in phase 2. In phase 3, which ran from November through this January, we brought the draft plan back to the public, as well as the final list of projects, and asked them to rank those projects in surveys. And we committed ourselves to saying that the resident input alone would be determining the order of implementation for those projects after plan adoption. In terms of the little more detail around the final plan and the projects that it proposes, in the Portola, really the top 2 projects, the very highest priorities, were increasing access and safety to the Alemany Farmers Market, really extending the Freeway Greenway and the work that the Portola Neighborhood Association has done from Silver Ave all the way up to Alemany, including pedestrian scale lighting, including a more protected and comfortable bike route. And that was the highest priority, although there were other priorities, including some other pedestrian lighting and some traffic calming and access improvements to McLaren Park. In Viz Valley, the responses were much more varied. And so there were a lot of projects that were kind of middle ranking because some people liked them a lot and other people's didn't. And so kind of among a lot of those projects that were in that middle ranking that ranked the highest were providing an uphill bike lane on San Bruno Avenue to connect the bike network between Bayshore and the existing bike lanes on San Bruno, to do the Mansell streetscape, which I'll show a concept design of on the next slide, and to connect the Viz Valley Greenway, which is a series of mid-block parks that right now don't have any crosswalks for you to get from one section of the Greenway to the next, and it kind of goes up the hill in Viz Valley. And so we had an idea to be able to connect those pieces of the Greenway with a series of raised crosswalks. In terms of Mansell Street, this is a street that has a lot of opportunity, and we also got a lot of interest from the community in being able to really transform this space. So we decided to do a concept design rather than just identifying a project. We developed 3 different concept designs, which we brought to the public throughout phases 2 and 3 for what we could potentially be doing on this street. This is one of them. This would include building a 2-way protected bike lane facility or a shared use path on the north side of this very wide median that's on Mansell Street. And this is a street that's on the high injury network that connects to McLaren Park, and that has this very large and median that is currently unused. So there's a lot of opportunities for things like public art or gathering spaces or programmed space that really is going underutilized today, that there's a lot of interest from the community in creating. So we want to see if we can create a transportation project that can improve access to that space and allow it to become programmed and flourish, while also improving things like our transit access, improving safety in the neighborhood, and improving access for people accessing the park. What we heard so far is that there's a lot of concern around traffic safety on that street, and making sure that any project that we bring is going to make the use of that median space safe for the public, as well as some specific comments around addressing safety around the high school and making it safe for people that are using bikes on that roadway. This is a process that'll go beyond the plan itself, where we need to continue working with the community around design that really responds to what their vision is for Mansell Street. But we really do believe that this could be a very competitive grant application in the future, probably for the 2024 Caltrans Active Transportation Program. And we want to make sure that we're well prepared in advance to submit an application for that. We also really wanted to make sure that we were reflecting what we call policy recommendations. It's really the needs and challenges and desires of the community that aren't addressed through all of the infrastructure projects that we'd identified. And that includes continuing our community partnerships with local organizations. It includes having a renewed focus on safety for transit, both on transit, riding transit, and waiting for transit, as well as making sure that we can connect people on local trips. Viz Valley is a very hilly neighborhood, and so mobility is a really big challenge, and we need to make sure that we can account for that, especially with the very diverse community that's there. That really leads into needing to make sure that we improve our multilingual access to services within this community, and make sure that people who speak other languages, first languages, really have the ability to access the full range of SFMTA services. We also really recognize this is an incredibly diverse community. And as a diverse community, there's a diversity of opinions. And we really need to understand that and respect that, and not necessarily take anything in this plan as complete marching orders, but only a starting point for continued work within the community to ensure that we're actively reflecting their needs and values and improving their daily lives in our work. Our next steps are to bring this to our board of directors in March, probably March 21st. We were at the SFCTA board on February 14th to give this info update to them. In the summer, we plan to move on towards traffic calming. We also are getting some NTIP funds from Supervisor Shimon Walton's office to help us with early implementation. And then into 2024, we're going to look to program more funds and pursue some grant applications to help us realize the projects that we've identified in this plan. The final plan will be going up on the website by either the end of this week or early next week, but the draft plan is available for viewing on the website right now. And the project email and phone number are also listed on this screen. And with that, I'm happy to stop sharing my screen. And thank you so much for your time tonight.
Great, thank you, Christopher. Can we open it up to questions from members real quick?
Just a reminder, CAC members, feel free to raise your hand using the reaction button or just wave to Kevin with your video on. It's a lot of boxes today.
Member Bars?
Yeah, thank you, Charities. I just think that this is a like, it seems like a really neat model for putting together a transportation plan and getting the community buy-in. So thank you very much for your work on this, Chris. It's pretty cool.
Great, thank you, Member Bars. Do we have any other questions, comments? Seeing none, I just had a quick question, Christopher, just particularly on, at the end of 2024, will there be a specific community liaison for the SFMTA, or the agencies overall, just particularly on kind of status updates of the community-based transportation plan, in case things need to get updated and things move along, things evolve, and the city is constantly changing. So just in like forward looking.
Yeah, that's a great question. We've had some very good luck in the Bayview in getting the community-based transportation plans that were adopted there implemented, with me acting as a informal liaison. But we haven't created a formal position out of that yet. I think that's a really great recommendation, and I'm plan to continue to be involved in implementation for the Viz Valley and Portola CBTP as well. But it may be worthwhile to look at how to make that a more robust and responsive and accountable position.
Great, thank you. Do we have any other questions from members? Seeing none, let's open it up to public comment.
Just a reminder for public comments, please raise your hand, please use the *9 feature, and that'll help us to see your hands that are raised. Thank you. Checking for public comments. Okay. All right, Hillary Brown. Go ahead, your 2 minutes starts now.
Okay.
Oh. Go ahead, Hillary.
Actually, I want to say I'm Hillary Brown as well as Urban Habitat, but I'm also part of SFCTA. I'm pretty sure we guys did that project. Do you guys connect with the accessibility team at SFCTA? So you have a lens of accessibility?
I'm sorry, go right ahead.
Well, I mean, I said what I said was you guys talked to the accessibility team at SFCTA, so you have a lens on accessibility when you do this project.
Yes, we did. We had a technical advisory committee, and one of the members of the technical advisory committee was a representative from SFMTA's Accessibility Services division. And yes, we did a substantial amount of work to look at things through an accessibility lens, both from the disability community and also from seniors. And we also did some presentations and work at the Felton Institute in Viz Valley that works specifically with seniors to understand and address their needs as part of that work.
But me personally, I am cane bound. I was cane bound for like 20 years. That's probably why I asked that question.
So this is public comment, so we're not going to be able to, unfortunately, have a back and forth dialogue for public comment.
Okay. Oh, yeah. No problem.
Thank you, Hillary. Checking for further public comments. I see no further public comment for item 6.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Chris. We appreciate your time.
Thank you so much.
Great. So let's jump into item number 7, which is adopting a motion of support to adopt the recommendations of the Caltrain 22nd Street ADA Access Improvement Feasibility Study, that's a mouthful, for the preferred improvements to achieve street to platform accessibility. I'm going to hand it over to Jesse Kohler.
Great, thanks, Chair Ortiz and CAC members. Good evening, Jesse Kaler, Rail Program Manager at the Transportation Authority. I'll be brief and then turn things over to David Pape from Caltrain. I just wanted to note a few things. This evening, we are recommending that the Transportation Authority concur with Caltrain's recommended alternative to address street to platform accessibility needs at the 22nd Street station. I want to thank and acknowledge Caltrain staff for their work on this study, which was funded by Prop K, and their partnership in identifying next steps. I also want to thank and acknowledge the District 10 office, Commissioner Walton and his staff, who've been instrumental in advancing this work, both at the Transportation Authority and at the Caltrain board, where Supervisor Walton serves as one of San Francisco's representatives to the Joint Powers Board. I also want to note in your next item, the grouped Prop K allocations includes a recommended allocation to Caltrain for the next phase of design and planning for this project, which will help to advance it, hopefully to seek funding and implementation in the coming years. So with that, I will turn it over to David from Caltrain.
Thanks, Jesse.
And I will pull your slides up, David.
Thank you. All right. Good evening, everyone. My name is David Pape. I'm a planner with Caltrain Rail Planning. And again, I'm here this evening to give a presentation on the 22nd Street ADA Access Improvement Feasibility Study. So let's just jump right in. Next slide, please. So I want to start by just giving a bit of context around this effort. When the JPB took over the railroad in the early 1990s, it inherited several stations that were not wheelchair accessible. Since then, Caltrain has worked to upgrade the facilities throughout the corridor, and today the system as a whole is accessible to riders with disabilities. While 22nd Street is currently only accessible by stairs, riders who use wheelchairs or other mobility devices do have the option to use 4th and King or the Bayshore stations, which are both fully accessible. However, we recognize that this arrangement is not ideal for many Caltrain riders. And so this study was really the first step in determining how street to platform accessibility could be achieved at the existing station. So I want to note that the opportunities to construct new access facilities are fairly constrained by the station's physical layout. As you can see in the photo, the platforms sit well below the street level, and in some places are up to 22 feet below. The station is also located underneath the I-280 viaduct, which has support columns that run throughout the station and platforms. And while you can't see them in the photo, there are also large gas and fiber optic utility lines which run beneath both platforms. All these elements really limit the space available for new access facilities and potentially can complicate construction. Next slide, please. So in addition to the station's existing physical constraints, the study also had to consider the fact that there are a couple of long-range planning efforts that could potentially relocate or rebuild 22nd Street Station. The first is the Pennsylvania Ave extension, which would shift the approach to future 4th and Townsend Station to an underground tunnel. The San Francisco County Transportation Authority is leading the preliminary environmental and engineering for the PAX tunnel. And one of the outcomes of that work is to determine the changes required at the existing 22nd Street Station. In addition to that, the San Francisco Planning Department also conducted the Southeastern San Francisco Rail Station Study, or SERS, which examined potential locations for a future Caltrain station or stations in Southeast San Francisco. This study considered multiple options for keeping 22nd Street Station in its current location and explored options for building new station in a nearby location. Because of the potential long-term implications of these efforts, these studies really need to be a consideration as the access improvements effort advances, and just worth noting that we will continue to coordinate with these efforts as things advance. Next slide, please. So this study was kicked off in February of 2020 at the request of District 10 Supervisor Walton. The scope of work was primarily focused on determining whether street to platform ADA access improvements are feasible within the existing station. It's important to note that because this is a planning level study, the engineering analysis was very much at the conceptual level. And then again, in addition, since the options for longer term station relocation and rebuild are being explored, the scope was really focused on access improvements that could be implemented within the existing station footprint to ensure that any recommended alternative could work as a near to medium term solution. So after identifying both feasible ramp and elevator alternatives for each of the platforms, we analyzed how they could be built, how long they might take to implement, and how much they would cost. In addition, we also looked at potential funding opportunities for the proposed improvements. Next slide. In addition, we also conducted several rounds of outreach throughout the course of this study. The study's core stakeholder group consisted of representatives from the list on the top of the slide. Feedback from these stakeholders really informed the design of the conceptual alternatives, as well as the criteria we used to evaluate the options and ultimately recommend an alternative for each platform. And in addition, we also conducted outreach efforts beyond what was originally scoped to include more accessibility centered groups, which you see on the bottom of the slide. And we did this to make sure that we were hearing from the individuals who would most depend on the facilities to access Caltrans service. Next slide, please. So in terms of the feedback, one of the most consistent pieces of feedback we heard from stakeholders was that ramps are generally preferred over elevators. And the reason for this is that many cited experiences where elevators are regularly vandalized and users often feel unsafe using them. Our stakeholders also acknowledge that elevators naturally require a significant amount of maintenance and tend to be out of service frequently. I think we've all experienced this at different transit stations. And when the elevators are out of service, you're back to square one. And in the case of 22nd, back to just stairs. And while there are certainly a number of downsides to the elevators, stakeholders also acknowledge that implementing ramps at 22nd Street Station would likely come with their own challenges. And a big part of this comes from the fact that the distance between the platforms and the streets are fairly high, which means that the ramps between them have to be significantly long. And interestingly, despite this, a few of our stakeholders advised us to decrease the slopes of the ramps if possible, essentially saying that if the ramps were inevitably going to be long, they shouldn't be as steep. And then finally, while all stakeholders felt that the alternatives we considered in our study would be an improvement from the existing state of the station, many stressed that a larger station rebuild or reconfiguration is ultimately what is desired in the long run. All right, so like I mentioned earlier, the study identified feasible options for both ramps and elevators at the station. However, based on the feedback that we received from our external stakeholders as well as internal, we expect ramps to yield a better overall user experience for those who depend on the facilities to access the platforms. And because of this, we recommend that the ramp alternatives shown here be considered for further engineering analysis and design. I'll note that the slopes of these two ramps are pretty well below the ADA maximum of 8.3%. And that does make for some significantly long ramps, particularly on the southbound side, which is over 450 feet, which is essentially the length of a city block. You'll also note that they switch back and forth. This is again to allow for the appropriate slopes and distances and the resting areas. And then in addition to these two ramp alternatives, the study also identified other improvements that would be needed, primarily platform resurfacing, as well as warning and directional tactiles. And we've also included that future studies should consider other lighting improvements as well as wayfinding. Next slide, please. So in terms of the next steps, first here, of course, to seek support for the adoption of the study and the recommended alternative. But following that, the immediate next step would be to advance preliminary design of the recommended alternative, for which we are also requesting roughly $447,000 in Proposition K funds. At a high level, the scope of work in the next phase would include alternative refinement, including confirmation of platform improvements, as well as additional technical analysis to confirm design viability. In addition to that, the scope would also include refined cost estimates and a funding and implementation plan. Beyond the next phase of design, the goal is to really secure funding to advance the remainder of the project through 100% design and construction. We feel that by advancing the designs a bit further, we'll be well aligned and competitive for Federal Transportation Administration All Stations Accessibility Program grant. And for those who may not be aware, this is a newer federal competitive grant program that was established as part of the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. And this program specifically assists in financing capital projects to upgrade accessibility of legacy fixed guideway public transportation systems for people with disabilities, including those who use wheelchairs. So again, a project like this is very well suited, we think, for this particular program. With that, that concludes my presentation.
Great. Thank you, David. Let's move over to Jerry, who I saw put a question in the chat.
Yeah, the question was, I'm just concerned about, will the design allow, well, actually, my question is gone. Oh, there it is. Do you have an estimate of the number of potential disabled users of the platform?
I don't have an estimate off the top of my head. I would have to look into that.
Okay, do you have a sense right now about how many how many users have to go to another station to use the facility?
I do not.
Okay, it's something if you could find, I'd appreciate it.
Certainly.
Thank you.
I saw Member Roselle put a question.
Sure, yeah, I'm curious if the design will allow for elevator option later on if it's found to be needed.
Yeah, that is something that would have to be looked at more specifically, but we did intentionally decouple the options to evaluate them separately, but certainly something that could be investigated later. They at least on the southbound side don't overlap. On the northbound platform though, where it's more constrained, there could be challenges to that.
Okay, thanks. I think it just might be something to be considered, because as we know, things change. Thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions from members? Seeing none, let's open up for public comment.
Checking for public comment. We have one public comment. All right, Roland, go ahead. Your time starts now. 2 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, and good evening. I think this is a really exciting project. It's long overdue, but I do have a question though. I think ADA access to a platform is wonderful, but that platform itself is not level boarding with the trains. So you're still going to need some kind of lift to allow people with wheelchairs to board the trains. So my question to the chair is whether Caltrain have got any plans of raising that platform so that it's level boarding, and if not, why not? Thank you.
Thank you, caller. Checking for additional public comments. If you do have a comment, please push *9 to raise your hand. Okay. No further comments for item 7, public comment.
Great. And as a quick reminder as well too, when making public comment, please address your comments to the entire committee and not to an individual on the committee. That being said, since we have no more public comment on this item, can we entertain a motion to approve item number 7?
This is Member Siegel. I move to approve the item.
Roselle seconds.
Great. Member Siegel motions, Member Roselle seconds. Can we take a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 7, Member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Member Chen.
Chen, aye.
Chen, aye. Member Daniels. Daniels absent. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz, aye.
Ortiz, aye. Member Roselle.
Roselle, aye.
Roselle, aye. Member Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. Chair, we have 7 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. Let's move on to item number 8, which is adopting a motion of support to allocate $16,406,910 and appropriate $687,000 in Prop K funds with conditions and allocate $2.8 million in Prop AA funds for 23 requests. So this is going to be the meat of our agenda. So I'm going to hand it over to SFCTA staff, Mike Pigford and Anna Laforte.
Good evening. So I think I'll jump right in, and then midway through, I will pass it off to Anna. So just to start out, oops, let me make sure. Okay, just to start out, we have a number of neighborhood program requests, which we also refer to as NTIP. So this is because this is our last round, and the reason we have so many requests in general is this is our last round of Prop K requests that will go through our board cycle. And we've worked hard with districts and with SFMTA staff to move forward priorities of all the districts that had remaining neighborhood program funding available. I also want to note that there will be a few, there'll be a new version of this neighborhood program under Prop L. So these funds will be refreshed for all the districts. And then you also notice in the in all your materials that there are a lot of amendments that are required to make funds available for all of these requests. We wanted to highlight that in most cases, the projects from which the funds are being reprogrammed are not ready to move forward at this time. And the sponsor agency is planning to resubmit those as future projects with funding under Prop L. So digging right in, our first request will design and construct new rapid flashing beacons to improve safety for pedestrians crossing Geary at 38th Avenue in District 1. The beacons are activated by pedestrians and they alert motorists and encourage them to yield at crosswalks. The next up is the District 2 safety study, which will focus on a toolkit of safety improvements for locations such as parks, schools, and medical facilities that have a lot of vulnerable users, such as children and seniors. The recommendation includes $270,000 for planning and would set aside $430,000 for implementation of study recommendations. And then the implementation funds would be released by the board after the study is completed and recommendations are finalized. Next up is Ortega Street improvements in District 4. This project would design and construct traffic calming and safety measures such as speed cushions, crosswalk striping, daylighting at intersections to improve visibility, and traffic circles at 2 intersections. This would be all along Ortega between 19th Avenue and 47th Avenue. These improvements are recommendations based on the Transportation Authority's District 4 mobility study, which included data analysis and community outreach. Next is the Mission Bay School Access Plan in District 6, which would include work by both Transportation Authority and SFMTA staff to plan for safe access for the new elementary school, which is set to open in Mission Bay. You can see the site on the map there. This study will include technical analysis, a review of existing plans, and coordination with SFUSD as well as the community. And then our recommendation includes setting aside $90,000 of the requested amount for implementation. And that again can be released by the Transportation Authority Board following completion of the plan. We have a second District 6 request, which would fund design and construction for traffic calming measures such as speed humps, new raised crosswalk, as well as some measures intended to deter sideshows at intersections. The locations proposed have been identified in consultation with the District 6 office as well as community members, and the list of the 11 locations is in your packet. Next up, the District 7 Ocean Avenue Safety and Bike Access Project would implement recommendations from the ongoing Ocean Avenue Mobility Action Plan, which is expected to be completed this spring. The project team anticipates that improvements will include pedestrian safety upgrades along Ocean Avenue, traffic signal equipment, striping and signage upgrades along Ocean, as well as left turn traffic calming and improved bicycle connections in the area. And then again, similar to previous requests, these funds are on hold until they are released by the board pending approval of the plan. Next in District 8, the next generation Sanchez Slow Street will design and construct a new generation of slow street infrastructure, including traffic diversion via traffic calming islands and permanent metal wayfinding signs on Sanchez between 23rd and 30th. Similar to before, $190,000 of this amount would be set aside for construction to be released once design is complete. In District 9, the Valencia long-term bikeway study will investigate long-term concepts for safety and streetscape improvements between Market and Cesar Chavez. The study will include technical analysis, stakeholder outreach, and conceptual engineering for pilot blocks that could test potential long-term configurations. The study is expected to be completed by the end of 2024. And then finally, for our neighborhood program requests in District 10, the Visitation Valley and Portola Community-Based Transportation Plan implementation project would set aside $435,000 to implement some of the improvements recommended through that plan, which you heard about from Christopher Kidd earlier. So I stole one of his maps of preliminary improvements. The SFMTA board, as he mentioned, is expected to adopt the plan in March, which is earlier than we had understood. And then the Transportation Authority could then, the board could then release the funds for implementation. So at this point, I can turn it over to Anna.
And if I could ask Chair Ortiz, would you like to take questions from CAC members on the neighborhood program requests now, and then I can continue?
Yeah, let's do that. And thanks, Anna. So I think I want to open it up for questions for members to talk about the neighborhood transportation funding requests. So if you have a question, please raise your hand. Member Siegel or Vice Chair Siegel.
Sorry, I can't figure out how to raise my hand with the reactions. Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I had requested ahead of time, or I had asked a question about the rectangular rapid flashing beacons. And I had asked about whether other treatments like stop signs had been considered. And I got a response saying that essentially they were not deemed appropriate for the 38th and Geary intersection because of multiple factors, including the bus throughput. I was wondering, both with regard to the 38th and Geary treatment and the incorporation of this technology in as part of the Bayview project. Essentially, I'm concerned that just the flashing lights alone won't be enough to slow down drivers or require them to yield without additional infrastructure treatments like narrowing the traffic lanes or raised crosswalks and things like that. I was wondering if any kind of additional infrastructure changes might be involved in these projects, and yeah, just given how often drivers seem to run red lights and not respect stop signs, I'm just concerned that this won't be enough, and I'm wondering if other like complementary infrastructure changes might be planned, and whether or not that's the case, how will the success of the project be evaluated? Will we be monitoring, and would we get updates on how often drivers are actually yielding when these flashing lights are engaged?
Those are great questions, and if the CAC wishes, we could return with an item in the future. For some of your technical questions, I think it would be best to have SFMTA staff respond, if that's all right. Let's see, who's is Jamie Parks on the line?
Good evening. Jamie Parks, Livable Streets, SFMTA, and I think Suresh Robach, who's the project manager, is on as well and can address as well. So with respect to rapid flash beacons, we can certainly evaluate this particular location as it goes in, but we have found both in San Francisco and the national research is that rapid flash beacons, which are, for folks who don't know, it's when you push the button and you get a very rapidly flashing yellow light, are actually one of the most effective pedestrian safety treatments that we've seen. And so I think the chat allows me to put links in, but Federal Highway Administration estimates that they reduce pedestrian crashes by almost 50% and over 90% of drivers do yield to them. They're very noticeable. So we have found them to be extremely effective. I think that in the long term, the other option here would be a full traffic signal. A full traffic signal takes, would cost more than $1 million in several years to implement. And so if we found that this wasn't successful, we could look into that long term. But we do see that this is a really effective treatment that we could do now, particularly since there was a pedestrian fatality at this intersection just last year. And we do recognize that this is one of the only uncontrolled crossings along Geary, from Market Street all the way to 40th Avenue. And it's a link in the chat as well for more kind of national research on rapid flash beacons.
Thank you. Yeah, I think I saw this study linked on the MTA site. That it seemed like it was a pretty small sample size of cities, or there was like 22 signals in 3 cities. So is there any data about MTA's use of I think, are there 2 currently in the city, or maybe more at this point? I might be looking at something outdated, but would love to see something about the success that MTA specifically has had with that treatment. Thank you.
Sure. I know we have a lot more than 2, and actually I think Bryant may be on and probably has an encyclopedic knowledge of exactly how many we have, but I know it's more than 2 for sure. And we can check and see if we have any evaluation data on how they've been working. I think anecdotally we've had very good results, but we can check to see if there's some specific data we can share as well. Yeah, over 30.
Great. Yeah, would love to see some data on that. Thank you.
Yep.
So we have member Ortega's hand up.
Hi, yes, Chair Ortiz. My question is regarding the Valencia bike path, and hopefully it's a lot simpler. Is this in relation to the proposal on the middle lane bike path that has been circulating on the SFMTA website, in the relation to what you said for the Cesar Chavez to Market lanes?
Yeah, it is related to feedback received on that proposal. So maybe Jamie, do you want to describe exactly how this proposal interacts with that proposal?
Sure. And I'm covering this evening for Kimberly Leon, who's the project manager for Valencia. So she couldn't be here this evening, so I will try to cover. So the NTIP proposal for Valencia is absolutely related. So as many people may know, SFMTA is interested in looking at a pilot of center running protected bike lanes along Valencia later this year, which our board will consider this spring. Regardless of whether that goes forward or not, obviously as staff, we hope it does, but regardless of whether it does, the need for, a longer term vision for Valencia remains. And so the purpose of this study would be to look at additional options that we haven't studied in detail yet so far. And so in particular, we've heard a lot of interest from the community in a one-way option for Valencia, so converting the traffic flow on Valencia for either all or a couple blocks to one-way traffic. and then also interest in pedestrianizing certain blocks of Valencia. So the purpose of this study would be to study those options in addition to the options we've already studied in detail, which include the center running bikeway pilot, as well as kind of more standard parking protected lanes on the side of the road. And so this study would allow us to study more options and report back and try to help us refine a long-term vision for the corridor.
Okay, and if you'll permit me one more follow-up question to that, which is, will there be any more community feedback on this next proposal phase of the study, or is it going to be taking the community feedback already gotten from the center lane study going forward?
Sure. Yeah, so the proposed study is not an action, it's a study to provide more information on alternatives. And so we would certainly be presenting the results of it. There are two primary components of it. The first is, a traffic and circulation study for the neighborhood. I think one thing that we've heard concerns and questions about is, well, if you make Valencia one way or pedestrian street, what does that do to the parallel streets, to the alleys, to the rest of the neighborhood? And so that's kind of a technical piece of the study, is looking at what would happen to the traffic flow in the neighborhood and what type of impacts there might be. And then the study itself does fund merchant outreach to identify concerns or interest in any of the potential options. And the outcome of the study would simply be analysis and results, which could be presented in any number of different forums and used for future public outreach.
Okay, thank you. That cleared up my confusion about why there were two separate proposals going on. Thanks.
So I'm calling myself real quick. Hi, Jamie. Nice to see you. So I think, I have a question and a comment, but I'll start with the question particularly. I know that there's been a lot of discussion, particularly within, a center bike lane, as well as, a plan that I'll get into in a moment on that. But I think particularly, I'd love to hear about the third option as well, too. I've been in conversations today, particularly with the supervisor's office regarding, a study of a third option, particularly around a car protected bike lane. And so I'd love to hear, just particularly on how that timeline would also coincide with that as well, too. Since there's obviously a lot of competing interests on Valencia regarding bike lanes, shared spaces, parklets, pickup drop-off zones, et cetera, et cetera. So I'd love to just kind of, hear what your plans are to explore that option as well, too, as that third option, since the supervisor has also made it clear that that's something they want studied as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Charities, for that question. We have previously studied in detail kind of a standard parking protected bike lane option that would provide one-way bike lanes on either side of the road. The initial intent of this scope was to study new options, but understanding that we want to, kind of keep all the options on the table, we are happy to include a summary of our analysis of a standard parking protected bike lane as part of the study, to make sure that all of the potential options are on the table going forward. The purpose here is to produce new information about additional options, but not to take any option off the table. We certainly don't want to take a parking protected option off the table, and we can include in the scope a summary of what that would look like and what kind of the impacts would be, the benefits and trade-offs.
So a follow-up on that, particularly, I think, given the fact that there has already been, 2 studies on this, particularly when it comes to a car protected bike lane, as well as a center bike lane in 2020, and then also now happening again, given the fact that we're going to be seeing shared spaces really eliminate, not eliminate, but there's going to be new rules and guidelines that are going to come up into place with that, the end of the 120-day extension that I think, if I'm not mistaken, happened 2 weeks ago. Particularly, we are going to see a major reduction in shared spaces put on that, right? And I know that's been a lot of the small business concern, particularly about which spaces are going to stay and not stay. So I think while summary, I think, is great, I want to make sure that we're also being detailed, particularly about, having a study, particularly for, this, like what it would look like when it comes to the final result of the shared space program, particularly not doing a summary prior to what the actual final landscape looks like. So really, just hoping that that's kind of clear on that, just to make sure that we understand like the actual end kind of landscape on that. Does that make sense?
Yes, that makes sense. And we could write up a paragraph about for the scope about what that would look like. But certainly in the next, I believe March 31st is the date for businesses to finalize and get their applications approved for permanent shared spaces. And so there are over 40 shared spaces right now on Valencia. My understanding is that a majority of those are moving forward, but until we know exactly how many and where, that's going to affect kind of our ultimate options. And we should know all of that by late spring. And so we can certainly factor in kind of an accounting of where shared spaces are in the permanent program as part of the scope, since we will know that in the next couple months.
Yeah, and I actually did our own community survey actually earlier this weekend, and we're actually estimating that half of those are going to be eliminated given that time, right? Just because of the actual cost of that as well too. So I'm curious to see what SFMTA does. I know community is working hard on our end as well too. The other thing I would say is I think, and I know that this was not necessarily generated by the SFMTA, but I'm still kind of shocked and appalled about the fact that in official documents that there was a release of the burrito plan, particularly within the Mission District. I thought that in itself, that should not have been a plan that was presented on official documents. There should have been another name that was presented with that, regardless of it coming from a very small majority of community members. I think it's really problematic when we're looking at how certain neighborhoods, particularly for the Latino community, to then have a plan associated with one of our foods. It's really, really problematic and insensitive. And I know it's not necessarily your direct fault on that, Jamie, but I think that's something feedback wise for the SFMTA to make sure that hey, let's stop, let's think about this for a moment. Let's come up with another name in addition to that. So those are my comments on that.
Yep, absolutely. Point taken and understood.
Member Bars.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Ortiz. A new idea that I think is really interesting that was included in the language of the Valencia long-term bikeway pilot is the NTIP project, is the idea to do a demonstration block, or basically a pilot within a pilot. Jamie, I'm just curious, has SFMTA done anything like that before, or would this be the first time? Do you have any sense of how that would work?
It's the first time that I'm aware of, so I'm not sure exactly how it would work, to be honest. But I think the thought was, as we go through this process, if depending on what the circulation study shows, and then also depending on the business outreach, if there is a particular block that's really well suited to trying out significant changes, we'd like to move that forward. And we do think that there's opportunities on Valencia to treat each block differently. That we don't need to have every single block of Valencia look exactly the same. And so as we see early results from this study that might indicate that one block or another is better suited for a particular treatment, we're interested in moving those forward when they make sense.
Great, thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions on this? Seeing none, let's open it up for public comment.
We have about 15 other requests.
Oh, okay. We're going to do it all together. Sorry.
Okay.
Apologies, false alarm, everyone.
No problem. Mike, while Mike's pulling up the slides, I just want to especially thank Jamie Parks and his staff for all of their work with preparing these funding requests for the neighborhood program. So excited to see them advancing. All right, so we have 3 requests from Caltrain, and these are all requests from funds that have been previously allocated as San Francisco's contribution to Caltrain's capital budget. These are funds that have been what we term deobligated, but they are from prior year grants that were completed under budget. This is the funding that David mentioned earlier in his presentation about the 22nd Street ADA access, 22nd Street Station ADA access improvement study, and this would advance the recommendations that are that were just adopted. And so the outcomes that we're looking forward to are a full funding plan development and also some preliminary cost estimates and design plans that would engage including some outreach and engagement. Next slide, please. The second of the Caltrain requests is for revenue vehicle rehabilitation, and this is to keep the passenger coaches in the state of good repair until the fleet is fully electrified. Next slide, please. System-wide track rehab. Again, this is a state of good repair program of replacing rails and ties and track grinding and doing some of the nuts and bolts for rail maintenance for their capital program. Next slide, please. This is the first of 2 requests from Public Works for curb ramp projects. These are for various locations around the city. These are for 45 ramps at 10 intersections. What I'll just highlight here is that there are a couple of locations that will trigger the de-energization of overhead lines, and in particular at 30th and Judah and also at Turk and Kittredge, that will trigger the need to de-energize those overhead lines for a couple of weeks during the construction. The locations are primarily identified through citizen complaints and requests, but the Mayor's Office and Mayor's Office on Disability and Department of Public Works work together to prioritize these locations as well as others. And on the next slide, this is also a citizen complaint or request that has been evaluated for this intersection at Sacramento and Sansom. And so this is to upgrade the ramps and to bring the intersection to be fully ADA compliant at the curbs. The intersection has a lot of sub-sidewalk basements in the vicinity, and so the cost per ramp for this particular project is higher than the prior request that you just saw. This will also have some de-energized overhead contact systems that are necessary both for Golden Gate Transit and Muni as well. Next slide, please. This is the first of 2 paving requests from Public Works for the Sunset Boulevard paving between Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, Martin Luther King Jr. Drive and Lake Merced Boulevard. The scope of this project, the funding is requested for the paving elements. It will also implement through this contract a series of improvements recommended in the 29 Sunset Improvement Project. This is a Muni Forward project for which the Transportation Authority has allocated Prop AA funds for the design phase and recommended the project and successfully for One Bay Area grant funds for the construction phase. Actually, I have to check on that if it ended up being funded with the One Bay Area grant. So I'll find that out before this meeting is concluded, before this item is finished. Let's see here, 34 ramps potential for implementation and that are being under consideration. And then there are 8 curb ramps that are known to be constructed. So still sorting out the final scope elements for the ADA relative improvements. Next slide, please. Hunters Point, this is a joint PUC sewer project that the Public Works paving project will be joining with various locations throughout the project area and curb ramps as well, and all of the curb to curb work that is associated, including traffic control. And this is from Prop AA funds. That's the one request that's from the vehicle registration fee. The next series of requests are from the SFMTA. The first of these requests is for the Kirkland Yard electrification project. MTA is going to be adding battery electric buses to its fleet, and these are expected to be received and put into revenue service by 2027. And so Kirkland Yard is on that critical path, retrofitting the facility with EV charging infrastructure to have the buses to allow for them to be an operational fleet. This phase that we are funding tonight would be to come up with the 30% design drawings, a schedule, cost estimates for implementation, and I think that's what I will highlight on this one. Thank you. Next request is for additional funds for a signal upgrade project and also for conduit improvements at Clay and Grant and Stockton and Sutter. We have previously allocated Prop K funds to this project. Since that time, there have been scheduled delays and also cost increases. Primarily, the most significant scope increase that has caused a cost increase. Most significant being the scope addition at Stockton and Sutter to remove an existing signal from a historic PG&E pole and to relocate that to another pole to improve the existing signal visibility and infrastructure at that intersection. Next slide, please. So this Vision Zero sign upgrade, the disclaimer on this project is that MTA has a grant application into the state of California for a highway safety improvement program grant for $2 million. We're waiting with bated breath to see if MTA has been successful in obtaining that grant. If so, the scope of the project will include a wide range of signs, including the no turn on red, stop, speed limit, no right or left, one way, signs throughout the city, and Prop K would provide the 10% required local match to the state grant. If MTA is not successful, they will still implement the no turn on red portion of these signs, and that would be at up to 200 intersections, primarily in the northeast sector, where crash concentrations are the highest. So this is to upgrade the signage for visibility improvements and for full compliance is the intended goal for safety on the streets. Next slide, please. This request is for additional funds for the Lake Merced Quick Build project. We have funded this previously with transportation, with TNC tax funds. And this would be to fund the increased cost of construction due to the complexity and the expanded scope for this work. It is one of the longest quick builds, or the longest quick build that SFMTA will have implemented through its quick build program. And so this will fully fund the funding needs of the project. Next slide, please. So this is to implement a community-based transportation plan in the Bayview that Christopher Kidd, we worked with him during funding for the planning phase, design phase, and now onto the implementation phase. So we're pleased to see, projects advancing in that regard. So rectangular rapid flashing beacons and bulb outs at 15 locations as recommended in the plan. Next slide, please. And I think this is the last request that I will be presenting. This is my last Prop K presentation, my last Prop K request to present ever. So for Safe Streets evaluation to the CAC. We have funded this for multiple years. This is where MTA collects its evaluation and data analysis of primarily of quick builds, but also of pilot projects and other programmatic efforts such as speed studies that it has done. The MTA was at the CAC in November presenting on the 2022 plan or evaluation program. And so they'll be back in front of the CAC in the subsequent years presenting on these evaluation updates. So, and there is a hyperlink in the presentation that's on our website so that you can access the interactive tool that MTA has been assembling and putting together to make this information as accessible as possible. So with that, I'm going to ask Eliza Paz to present this last request of this grouped item.
Hello, thank you, Anna, and good evening, CAC. My name is Eliza Paz, Principal Planner with the TA in the Planning Division. This request is for about $406,000 to conduct a Transportation Demand Management or TDM travel market analysis. TDM is low-cost capital projects, programs, and policies to shift when and how people travel to maximize the efficiency of our transportation network and support mode shift. This project will identify travel markets that are best suited for TDM investments due to factors such as trip types, travel distances, transit effectiveness, land uses, or inequities in the transportation system. And will develop an updated TDM toolbox along with evaluation guidelines for TDM projects going forward. The study will also supplement the MTC Regional Travel Diary Survey to increase the San Francisco sample size to support this effort. And the study is expected to be completed in summer of 2024.
And with that, we have lots of project managers here to answer questions from the CAC.
Perfect. Let's open it up to questions from the members. A quick reminder that we're asking one question per member given the time constraints on these projects. Member Siegel.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz, and thank you all for the presentation. I have a question about the Kirkland Yard electrification project. I appreciated the additional information that was provided to CAC members about the zero emission bus rollout plan. That was really helpful context. Acknowledging that this project is to comply with the state's innovative clean transit regulation, and also acknowledging that this requirement is in the name of sustainability. I am concerned that we're about making such a huge investment in the battery electric bus procurement and the associated retrofitting of all the various bus yards when Muni accounts for such a small percentage of the city's emissions. I think it's 1% according to the agency. And I was wondering if that money might be better spent on reliability and capacity investments in Muni service to encourage mode shift away from private automobiles, which account for such a greater share of emissions. So I was wondering if MTA or CTA have made any attempt to push back on the state requirement, or at least push back the timeline, given that the agency is still struggling to ramp up service post-COVID, as well as the concerns about the transit fiscal cliff. Or is this something that we would want to do regardless of the state requirement, and this just happens to be the timeline? Also, it seems like maybe might be ahead of schedule for the 2040 requirement. And is this something that we could invest in a bit further down the road? Yeah, I hope that makes sense. And I was wondering if anybody could answer those questions.
Yeah, I'd like to MTA staff to address your question. We'll see if we can find an answer to you before the end of this item, and if not, we do have the project manager Quan Chen on the line.
Yes, I'm on.
There you
I'm
are.
sorry.
Okay, thank
I
you.
was just trying to work the Zoom technology to unmute. My colleague is also here, but I think some of the questions we've heard from Vice Chair Siegel is on the policy level, very high level. But I'm on the facility side in terms of implementing the plan. So I think tied to this is the buses are going to get retired when they end their life cycle use. So the buses that we're applying for to replace are the diesel hybrid buses that are on the roads, and as they get near the end of life, it will segue and align with the procurement purchases of the BEBs, which are being funded through, or not funded, but being mandated by the CARB and this ICT program. So with that in mind, the logistics of that is to replace the diesel hybrid buses that are Kirkland and also with the other SFMTA fleets. But not all the bus yards are going to get modernized because some of the bus yards are currently clean and green in the sense that there are trolley buses. So we're looking at the ones that are housing these fossil fuel bus yards, such as Kirkland, number one, followed by Potrero, which is the first one under construction with the Triple P joint development project with affordable housing on top of it. And then the third one that's also in line is the Presidio in the conversation with this rollout plan for the 2035 is the goal from SFMTA, but in terms of the state mandate, it's the 2040 year. I hope that can answer your question on whatever I can reply back in terms of implementation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's helpful. Thank you. I may have some follow-up questions I could send as well. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Thank you, Vice Chair Siegel. Do we have any other questions from members? Please use the raise hand feature if so. Member Bars?
Yes, thank you, Chair Ortiz. I have a question actually on Anna Laforte's last Prop K item that she presented on the Safe Streets Evaluation Program. Well, I have a comment and a question. So the comment is that that's a really wonderful resource. I really appreciate it. I enjoyed the presentation that we received in the fall, and also I have read the evaluation report in the past. I am actually very curious to know how this evaluation has changed MTA's approach to doing projects and plans. Jamie, do you think you could, I'm assuming it's Jamie, maybe it's somebody else, but I'm wondering if someone from SFMTA could speak to how that has changed your approach to Safe Streets projects.
I could try, but I'll turn it to Brian Liang first, who's the evaluation program manager.
Hi, everybody. Brian Liang here, Livable Streets Transportation Planner and Safe Streets Program Manager, Evaluation Program Manager. In terms of the findings and how it's kind of changed our approach to projects, if you recall from the report, it definitely showed that our Quick Build program has been very effective at improving safety in the near term, especially as we work through some of our longer term capital projects. I think one of the biggest takeaways is that regardless of the project type, whether it's capital or Quick Build, a lot of our treatments, have been making a big impact on improving traffic safety, especially for pedestrians and bicyclists. And we know that, quick builds alone aren't enough to get to where we want to go, but they are a really great starting point and have provided a lot of valuable information that helps us inform our designs to make it even more robust and better as we continue working and iterating through our projects throughout the city.
And I'm going to give two very specific examples as well. I think there are a lot, but the two examples would be bicycle signal phases and also no turn on red restrictions. And so when we did an evaluation of bicycle signal phases a few years ago, we found out that they worked very well, that most users complied and understood how they worked, and that's influenced our work to move away from what are often referred to as mixing zones, where people biking and people turning right cross each other approaching the intersection, and moving more to signal separation. And so the evaluation result allowed us to invest more in bicycle signals. And then the no turn on red, we did that first in the Tenderloin, and there were some questions about whether that would work or not, and whether it might actually end up with having more conflicts with right turns on green as a result of having no right turns on red, and it proved to work fairly well. And so the pending HSIP application that Anna just mentioned that would extend no turn on red to another 200 intersections, that recommendation is because we had an evaluation that showed that it worked in the Tenderloin. So I think we could probably come up with a half dozen or more of those, but those are just two that came to mind.
That's great. Thank you very much. I appreciate both of your responses.
Great. Do we have any other questions from members? Seeing none, let's move on to public comment.
Checking for public comment. First, public, Hillary, go ahead. Your 2 minutes begins now.
Okay.
Actually, my name is Hillary Brown. I'm with Urban Habitat. I'm also with SFMTA Municipal Accessibility Committee. Actually, most of my questions were asked during this because you guys doing partnership with like zero. Actually, obviously speaking, is zero, as well as you probably do partnership with the SF Bicycle Collision. And I'm pretty sure when it comes to your progress, you do partnership with both those organizations, I assume.
Okay, thank you for your comment, Hillary Brown. Next, we have public comment is Chris Faust. Go ahead, Mr. Faust, you can start your your 2 minutes starts now.
You. I'm referring to the Next Generation Sanchez project, and I urge you to reject this proposal for Sanchez Street as written because it states will include the installation of traffic calming islands. This proposal with traffic islands violates the principle of the current final design, which has no solid elements. The current design employs flexible ballers to ensure safety for bike, motorcycle, and scooter riders, especially at night when visibility is low. Emergency vehicles, especially fire department ladder trucks, are not impeded by flexible barriers. This proposal with traffic islands violates the community agreement on a final design in which SFMTA promised that no permanent elements would be installed. The current design is a result of a compromise that calmed the community. However, the process was difficult for the numerous Sanchez Street residents who are non-supporters of Slow Sanchez. They felt harassed by and intimidated by a large organized citywide effort to stifle their views. This current proposal will stir it up again, open those wounds, and further undermine trust in process. Furthermore, the current proposal is a result of a one-sided process that did not seek, incorporate, or consider balanced community input. Additionally, other suggested elements, such as pedestrian bulb outs on Sanchez Street, are an unnecessary expenditure. Traffic is light on Slow Sanchez, where the bollards protect pedestrians on half the street, and the cross streets are narrow. The city is facing a deficit. This is an unnecessary expenditure. The money could be better spent fixing potholes and improving safety on streets parallel to Sanchez Street, such as Noe Street and Church Street, where congestion has noticeably increased. I'm urging you to reject this item and demonstrate fiscal prudence and support for community process. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your comments. We have one more public comment from Mary Davis. Mary, go ahead. Your 2 minutes begins now.
Hi, I live just off Valencia Street and regularly use it for transportation on my bike and to frequent the restaurants and shops. I support allocating these funds for the Valencia long-term bike study. I want to see Valencia Street's design prioritize safety for pedestrians and bicyclists and remain a lively urban place. I especially support that this would include testing different configurations during the pilot study, allowing the entire community to come together to expediently test the long-term solutions. Thanks.
Thank you, Mary. And we do have another public comment from Zach Lipton. Go ahead, Zach. Your 2 minutes begins now.
Hi, good evening. I've been traveling up and down Valencia by most every mode of transportation pretty much my whole life. And I also just wanted to speak in support of the funding for the Valencia long-term bikeway study. Valencia is on the city's high injury network and is really just serving all of its users poorly right now, not least the senior member of our community who was just killed at 16th and Valencia recently. Obviously, as the discussion tonight shows, there is so much interest and tension over Valencia, and this funding will provide the resources for the real community input process that Member Ortega and Chair Ortiz were sort of referring to. So that really the study can be the community coming together to imagine the best vision for Valencia Street that isn't just about designing a street that meets cyclist needs, but can look at how Valencia can better serve residents, visitors, merchants, the adjacent American Indian and Latino cultural districts, the labor conditions for food delivery workers and everyone else who relies on the street. I'm especially glad, as Member Bars said, to see that the project description includes testing potential street designs on pilot blocks. And I really hope that this study can become an active experimental process of that pilot in a pilot, I think is a great way to say it. That it's a real opportunity to not just do surveys, but empower the community by asking them what they need and then directly responding with rapid prototypes and experiments that they can see right on the ground what designs are possible. And that the city can then use that to collect data about all the possibilities for Valencia rather than just testing this one center running bike lane design. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach, for your comments. And there is no further public comment for item 8.
Thank you so much, everyone, for public comment. So I think we do require a motion on this. So I'll entertain a motion.
I move to approve. Chair Ortiz, Member Bars.
Great. Member Bars makes the motion. Any seconds?
Member Siegel, second.
Great. So let's do a roll call vote.
On the motion to approve item 8, Member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Member Chen.
Chen, aye.
Chen, aye. Member Daniels. Daniels absent. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz, aye.
Ortiz, aye. Member Roselle.
Roselle, aye.
Roselle, aye. Member Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 7 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. Let's move on to item number 9, which is adopting a motion of support to allocate 10 million in Prop K funds with conditions for downtown rail extension engineering development and procurement preparation, as well as a 3.5 appropriation with conditions for downtown rail extension rail program oversight and technical tasks for engineering and procurement, and appropriate 2.5 million with conditions for Pennsylvania Avenue extension pre-environmental bridging study. Presenting, we're going to have Jesse Kaler, Rail Program Manager.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. Good evening again, committee members. Jesse Kaler, Rail Program Manager at the Transportation Authority. I'm happy to be here this evening to present the very last set of recommended allocations from the Prop K program. These 3 requests all pertain to the Downtown Rail Extension Program of projects. I do want to start by thanking Anna Lafort and the policy and programming team for all their work on these requests, along with our agency staff partners from the Transbay Joint Powers Authority, with whom we have also worked very closely on this item. We are joined this evening by Alfonso Rodriguez, DTX Project Director at TJPA, as well as Oscar Quintanilla, TJPA's Budget and Procurement Director. The DTX program of projects includes multiple initiatives that are planned to transform the Caltrain corridor in San Francisco. The centerpiece of the program, of course, is the downtown rail extension itself. The DTX project, also named as the Portal Project, is led by the TJPA, and it will bring Caltrain and future California high-speed rail into the Salesforce Transit Center in the heart of downtown. The DTX project is the most mature of these 3 projects in terms of its development and readiness for implementation. It is currently in the design phase, and subject to funding, construction of the primary tunneling contract would start in 2025. Moving down this slide, the 4th and King rail yards is the site of Caltrain's northern terminus station, as well as a significant quantity of train storage for the railroad. Caltrain is currently leading a business case process to study alternatives for the long-term future of the site. The Transportation Authority is one of several partners in this work under a memorandum of understanding that guides planning for projects at or near the rail yards. Finally, the Transportation Authority is leading project development for the Pennsylvania Avenue Extension, or PAX project. PAX is San Francisco's preferred alignment to complete the grade separation of the Caltrain corridor within the city by constructing a tunnel that would extend south from the DTX project beneath 7th Street and Pennsylvania Avenue. TJPA has requested the allocation of $10 million in Prop K funds to advance engineering design development and procurement preparation for DTX. These activities are a key component of the broader pre-construction work program for DTX, through which TJPA and its agency partners have been working together to meet the requirements of the Federal Transit Administration for candidate projects that intend to seek funding from the FTA New Starts Grant Program. The DTX project plans to seek a New Starts grant to fund up to 49% of the project's cost. This will be a federal grant of well over $3 billion. There is currently an intense focus and alignment across the DTX project team in order to put the project forward to the Biden-Harris administration for this substantial federal investment. Earlier this month, the TJPA board authorized an interim submission to the FTA, which keeps the project on track to secure this federal grant by early 2025. The $10 million request before the committee this evening will specifically fund the preparation of design plans for utility relocations, development of procurement documentation for the tunneling contract, and program management and program control activities. As is typical for major projects under the Prop K program, the recommended allocation to TJPA identifies several special conditions. In this case, for DTX specifically, there are a number of conditions related to the development of the governance approach for the project as it moves toward construction. Project development work for the DTX project has been governed since 2020 by the Peninsula Rail Program Memorandum of Understanding, under which 6 agencies, including TJPA and the Transportation Authority, are working together to bring the project to ready for procurement status. This multi-agency approach to develop the project stemmed in part from the recommendations made in 2019 by an expert peer review of the project, which was commissioned by the Transportation Authority Board. Under this existing MOU, the Transportation Authority and the Metropolitan Transportation Commission are jointly developing a set of recommendations for project governance to succeed the existing MOU and to support the needs of the upcoming procurement and construction phases of the project. These recommendations are planned to be brought forward through the MOU and TJPA board process in April and May of this year. For the subject $10 million request, this allocation is recommended to be conditioned on future presentation regarding these governance recommendations and the planned approach to project governance during project delivery. $4.7 million out of the total $10 million is recommended to be placed on reserve for future release by the board following this presentation on governance. In addition to these governance-related conditions, the allocation also has a number of conditions with respect to major project oversight and with respect to Prop K program requirements. The next request this evening is for an appropriation of $3.5 million to enable the Transportation Authority's continued active involvement and support to the DTX project as it advances. We have been deeply engaged with TJPA, Caltrain, and the other DTX project partners for nearly 3 years in successfully delivering on the project development work program, in which we are leading or co-leading specific activities while also supporting and engaging in other tasks led by TJPA. This request will provide for our ongoing management and technical engagement in the upcoming engineering and procurement phases of work, including our specific work program activities, as well as our major project oversight responsibilities under the Prop K and future Prop L program. In addition, this request includes a small set aside for our engagement in the rail yards planning and business case work led by Caltrain, which I described at the start of the presentation. The final request before the committee is for the Pennsylvania Avenue Extension pre-environmental bridging study. Last year, the Transportation Authority completed the PAC's project initiation study, which undertook an initial technical evaluation of design concepts for the PAC's project. This next phase of work is intended to prepare the project technically and organizationally for potential future advancement into the environmental review process, with this bridging study undertaking further technical analysis, deepened work with Caltrain and other project partners, and project-specific engagement with the community and stakeholders. That concludes my staff remarks. I'm happy to address questions, and as I noted, TJPA staff is also with us this evening. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much. Can we open it up to questions from our members? Seeing none, can we open it up to public comment?
Checking for public comments. And no public comment for item 9.
Great. Member Bars, I saw you come on screen. Do you have a question? Okay.
I do, Chair Ortiz. Thank you. You have a good spidey sense. I have a question that I hope is not a dumb question for staff, but what is a pre-environmental bridging study? Like, what are we going to learn from a pre-environmental bridging study?
It's a great question, Member Bars, and through the chair, I acknowledge that that term is a mouthful, pre-environmental bridging study, and we'll surely need a snappier title when we engage more broadly with the community. The principle at play here is that as staff, we're not really in a position yet to make a strong recommendation to you all and the board that the project is truly ready to advance into environmental. Environmental would represent a quantum of investment, an order of magnitude, if not more, to undertake. And so to undertake environmental would probably be a $50-ish million exercise. And we would want to prepare for that with a real strong understanding of what is the design solution that we expect will ultimately be pursued. Is that solution fundable and deliverable? And is it acceptable with our partner agencies? And have we developed the governance approach, speaking of governance, to work closely with the city and Caltrain, High Speed Rail Authority, and others to complete that environmental on a timely and responsible basis? So this scope is really a collection of activities to get ready for that more significant level of investment and to make an affirmative recommendation or another type of recommendation with respect to the project's readiness to make that next more significant investment to develop the project.
Okay, thank you for your answer. That does help. I have to, like, I'm aware that environmental review can be significant and expensive parts of projects. I understand that principle well, but it is this, I mean, this is I know a very complicated project, but it is also a very small part of a project insofar as like building an entire high-speed rail network for the state of California. Is this typical of every link in the high-speed rail network that's under development?
Thanks for that question, Member Bars. I am not sufficiently familiar with every portion of the statewide system to give an answer immediately on comparison to other projects. I will acknowledge that we always like to say San Francisco is quite unique. For better or worse, we are rather unique with respect to both the scale of this grade separation and the level of investment that we required, as well as some of the local considerations for reconnecting neighborhoods and managing impacts to the surface transit system. So certainly within the Bay Area, the 16th Street crossing, which is really the focus of this Pennsylvania Avenue project, is the most significant bus transit crossing of the entire shared Caltrain and high-speed rail corridor, which does make it quite unique and really imperative for us to have a solution that protects muni operations while also managing our desire or accommodating our shared vision to increase Caltrain service and bring high-speed rail to the corridor. So part of this work in this next phase will be working with the High-Speed Rail Authority and the state on teeing up a funding strategy for the project, for which we would certainly be seeking an investment to reflect the benefit of the project to that future high-speed rail system, as well as its benefits and implications locally and for Caltrain as a regional operator.
Okay.
Great. Do we have any other questions from members? Oh, sorry, I saw a cat. I thought it was a hand. Seeing none, let's move it on to public comment.
Checking for public comments. And also just a reminder for public comment to unmute, to raise your hand, please dial *9. Okay, no public comment for item 9.
Great. So let's move on and entertain a motion to approve this item.
This is Jerry. I'll move to approve this item.
This
Do
is
we have-
Member Siegel, I'll second.
Great. Member Levine makes the motion. Member Siegel second, or Vice Chair Siegel seconds. Let's open it up for a roll call vote.
On the motion to approve item 9, member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Member Chen.
Chen, aye.
Chen, aye. Member Daniels. Daniels absent. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, I.
Ortega, aye. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz, aye.
Ortiz, aye. Member Roselle.
Roselle, I.
Roselle, aye. Member Siegel.
Siegel, I.
Siegel, aye. We have 7 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. Let's move on to item number 10. Adopting a motion of support to award a construction contract to Golden State Bridge Obayashi joint venture in an amount not to exceed $84 million. And authorize an additional construction allotment of $15 million. Approve a contract amendment with WMH Corporation in the amount of 2.6. Approve a contract amendment with WSP USA in the amount of 5.9, and authorize the executive director to execute all other related supporting and supplemental agreements for the West Side Bridges seismic retrofit project. Presenting, we'll have Carl Holmes, Deputy Director for Capital Projects.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. Carl Holmes, SFCTA, Deputy Director, Capital Projects. Thank you, Lily, for sharing the screen. So we're happy to seek CAC approval for the West Side Bridges construction phase contracts. Next slide, please. Wanted to give the CAC a bird's eye view of course, a number of projects that are happening on the Yerba Buena Island, but I want to focus your attention on 3 elements. On the bottom left is the West Side Bridges project. And to orient you, going up on the page is going eastbound towards Oakland, and then going downwards on the page is going westbound into San Francisco. So again, the bottom left is the West Side Bridges project. On the far right in the yellow is the Southgate off-ramp, which is also a project that we are finalizing right now, and it is expected to open in April. And then I also want to direct your attention to the middle of the island in pink, which is the Forest Road Detour. I'm mentioning the Forest Road Detour and the off-ramp because you'll hear about them a little bit later in this presentation. Next slide. So this is a zoomed in version of the West Side Bridges contract scope. The total construction cost is $115.9 million. We are leading this project delivery, and it is to replace 7 seismically deficient bridges, as well as retrofitting 1 bridge. And this will create a realigned roadway with retaining walls, as well as a Class 2 bicycle facility and a transit-only on-ramp for westbound traffic. We expect to award the contract with CAC approval and board approval in March, and we can go to the next slide. Want to take an opportunity to thank all of the key stakeholders and funding partners. I won't go through each of them, but you can see them on the slide. Next slide. This is a listing of all of the funding partners and all of the dollar values that are associated with this $115.9 million fully funded effort that we're about to embark on. Next slide. This shows the cost of the base construction, as well as the additional construction allotment, and then the construction engineering. So the base contract is $84 million, as Chair Ortiz mentioned. The additional construction allotment includes a 10% contingency of roughly $8.5 million. It includes roughly $2 million of financing costs. And then it also includes an additional just under $5 million of items that are supplemental items, including owner furnished materials. And that brings us to the $15.1 million. And then the construction engineering includes the work that is needed by the designer, as well as the construction management team and also SFCTA staff. Next slide. On the schedule, I'd like to focus your attention to the middle of the slide that shows the Forest Road detour. If you remember, I showed the on the bird's eye view, the detour that was in the pink. That needs to open in June of this year in order for us to start construction. And so if you backtrack going up on this slide, you'll see that your approval is critical in order for us to take this to the board in March, which would allow us to execute the contract. So again, starting construction in June of this year, we're pushing towards completion in December of 2026. And then we have a 3-year period where we have to evaluate the performance of the improvements that are installed, and that leads us to December of 2029. Next slide. So wanted to give you a little bit of insight of the construction contract. This is using a project delivery method called construction manager and general contractor, also known as CMGC. And this delivery method was authorized by the board in March of 2018. And so we awarded the contract in October of 2018. And since that time, we had been working with advancing the design with the benefit of having a contractor on board to help educate the design process, provide estimates along the way, going from a 30% design to a 60%, 90%, and 100% designs. And it allowed for us to have cost estimates. So the process yielded a construction estimate from the contractor, and then a construction estimate by our engineer. And then we also had the benefit of an independent cost estimate that allowed us 3 data points. And the independent cost estimate is a number that we had and never disclosed to the contractor, but from where we sit, we were able to have 3 data points. And we're happy to say that the contractor cost was within 3% in terms of cost difference between the independent cost estimator and the construction contractor estimate. We're also pleased that we are projecting almost a 13% DBE participation, which exceeds the goal of 11%. Next slide. On the design support during construction, we are also pleased to inform you that we have a DB participation projected at 15%, which exceeds the 12% goal. And the effort that is needed is to provide that support during construction in the event of design changes that are needed, or when the contractor has questions about the design during construction. Next slide. So we have also a construction management service that will be performing management on behalf of the TA, Transportation Authority, and we are seeking approval to amend the contract with WSP, and that is valued at just under $6 million. And that they will be the key staff that will be managing the project for us, working with not only the contractor directly, but also with TIDA, Treasure Island Development Authority, which is the department under with the city and county of San Francisco, and also with other departments such as Public Works and MTA and even Caltrans. And they are also projecting a 13% participation for DBE, which is also exceeding the goal of 10%. Next slide. So any project has risks, and I wanted to highlight some unique risks that are in addition to the unforeseen conditions that a project generally has to encounter. And these four are the Public Works Department. We're working with them directly, and we have a construction permit that we expect to receive in March. We don't have it yet, but we're working closely with Public Works and expect to get that next month. We also have a couple of funding obligations that need to be finalized, namely with the Federal Highway Administration and Caltrans. The funds are programmed, however, they're just not fully obligated yet, and we're working closely with those agencies and expect to have those finalized next month or early April. Also, the Southgate off-ramp, which I showed you earlier, we expect to open that in April, and that needs to be open in order to allow access onto the island once we close off for West Side Bridges construction. And then, of course, the Forest Road Detour, that is being completed by the developer, Wilson-Meany, and that is expected to be completed in May. Next slide. So these next two slides itemize the 6 actions that we're seeking CAC approval. We've got item 1, which is the contract with the joint venture. Item 2 is the additional construction allotment. Item 3 is the design support during construction. Next slide. Item 4 is the construction management services. And then items 5 and 6 are to authorize executive director to enter into agreements and to be able to negotiate non-material terms. So an example of what we're asking in those 2 items are we are working with TIDA to have a construction MOA in order for us to perform work on the island. We will also be engaging, as I mentioned, with Public Works on the construction permit, and they will be providing oversight, as well as we anticipate agreements with MTA and Caltrans. I believe that concludes the presentation and open for questions and comments. Thank you.
Great. Let's open it up to questions from members. Member Bars.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. So there's a lot involved in this project, and it's also a pretty significant investment, which is why I want to make sure I fundamentally understand that is this adding any new highway miles? Or is this just retrofitting what exists and strengthening it?
I believe it's not adding highway miles, but I will ask Dale Dennis, who's also on the line, to correct if I am incorrect. But it's basically retrofitting what's existing. There may be a slight increase in mileage, but I would say that's probably negligible. And Dale, correct me if I'm wrong. Looks like my response stands.
Great, thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions from members? Seeing none, let's move to public comment. Oh, actually, Member Ortega.
Hi. Yeah, real quick. I just wanted to add on to Member Bars's question. There's a ramp, I think, that is listed on the improvement section, which will hopefully help its traffic flow on the bridge is it's a left turn starting at 50 miles an hour off of Treasure Island. So I'm really happy to see that that's been addressed, as that is one of the most harrowing entrances I've ever had getting onto a freeway in my life. And so if that adds an additional mile for safe merging, I would say that that is good. And I believe that I read that correctly in Mr. Holmes. Is that correct?
So this contract will provide a transit-only on-ramp. And so, like I said, there likely is a net gain, but it's negligible, but in terms of number of miles. But I was also referring to a Southgate off-ramp. I'm not sure which you were referring to.
I can't remember, but I'm happy to see something for it.
Sure.
So thank you.
Great. Do we have any other questions for members? Seeing none, let's move to public comment.
Checking for public comments. And there is no public comment for item 10.
Great. Can we take a, can we entertain a motion?
This is Member Siegel. I move to approve this item.
Do we have a second?
This is Jerry. I'll second it.
Great. Vice Chair Siegel makes the motion. Member Levine makes the second. Can we take a roll call vote?
On the motion to approve item 10, member Bars.
Bars, aye.
Bars, aye. Member Chen.
Chen, aye.
Chen, aye. Member Levine.
Levine, aye.
Levine, aye. Member Ortega.
Ortega, aye.
Ortega, aye. Member Ortiz.
Ortiz, aye.
Ortiz, aye. Member Roselle.
Roselle, aye.
Roselle, aye. Member Siegel.
Siegel, aye.
Siegel, aye. There are 7 ayes. The motion is approved.
Great. Let's move on to item number 11, which is an informational item update on the Yerba Buena Island multi-use pathway project.
Good evening, Chair Ortiz and CAC member. I'm Mike Tan, a senior engineer with Capital Projects, and I'm here to talk about the Yerba Buena multi-use pathway project. There are a number of projects, of course, on Yerba Buena Island, and this will kind of help with a lot of the bicycle and pedestrian circulation that's on the island currently right now. So at the moment, the eastbound of the Bay Bridge, there's a multi-use path coming all the way from the East Bay to the island itself. Usually when the bicyclists and the pedestrians actually reach the island, there's really limited access for them to actually continue their journey. We did put in the Quarters 9 Vista Point area as a rest area, for these travelers. And recently, of course, the ferry terminal was finished construction and the ferries are currently in operation. However, there is a very limited and rather sort of not so safe passage to get from the existing bike landing to the ferry terminal. So we are proposing to actually put in this multi-use path in this yellow line that you see here. Okay, currently out there, there's really no sidewalk. There are no bike lane out there, and so this multi-use path will actually provide a lot of protections. This project is also a part of the Bay Skyway project that is, from the Bay Area Toll Authority, and this is just a phase of it. Let me go over just the current preliminary project schedule. We are currently in the preliminary engineering and environmental approval phase. We are hoping to get the CEQA approval process by spring. We have worked on this in the past already, and a feasibility study was actually completed a couple years ago. We're currently continuing on the preliminary engineering. We're also hoping to get NEPA approval by summer of this year, and that will hopefully set things up for the final design of this project. We're looking at between mid-2023 to 2025. If everything goes well, we're hoping to actually start construction in 2025 and actually complete construction by 2027. Now, one of the reasons why we're having this current schedule that you see right now is that there are other projects, such as the West Side Bridges project, that we're hoping to take advantage of that window of opportunity when Treasure Island Road and Hillcrest Road will be closed, for those projects. As far as the current multi-use pathway project, we're looking at a project delivery method in which we will take the path that I showed earlier, and I do have some additional drawing that I'm going to pull up, and we're going to segment that into 4 different segments. That is our current approach to it, but that may change. We're still early in the design process itself. The segment 1 is next to the YBI Bike Landing Quarters 9 and the Southgate project that is under construction at the moment and finishing. Our project is right next to the Southgate project, okay, and we are looking to deliver that as a future standalone project. Segment 2 will be from Forest Road to the West Side Bridges, and this will be part of the Hillcrest Road widening project, in which that particular project, we're going to widen Hillcrest Road to meet modern city standards. And we would also like to take advantage of that project to put in the multi-use pathway project. Segment 3 is with the West Side Bridges project. And our portion of this project is that, we're hoping to actually restripe parts of the West Side Bridges project. That project is going to put in a class 2 bike lane. There is still wide enough shoulder area, so we're looking to actually restripe that for the multi-use pathway project. And segment 4 will install the multi-use path and continue it out to McCullough Road. From McCullough Road, there is currently a causeway out there. The private developer TICD has put in basically bike lanes out there on McCullough Road, and that will lead to the ferry terminal. This is currently a concept rendering of segment 1 that we're looking at. So you can see the Southgate project that is in the middle, and we are coming for the multi-use path from the bike landing. We're looking, because of the grade difference that's out there, we're looking at putting in a spiral ramp, a loop at that location, and to continue that multi-use path along the outside of Hillcrest Road. What you see in green are basically bike landings. On the bottom left side is a typical cross section. We would like to put in the multi-use path at roughly about 16 feet wide, and that will accommodate a bike lane in each direction and also pedestrian path. Now, for the multi-use path at this location, most of it is going to be at grade, with the exception of the spiral loop. Segment 2, this is with the South Hillcrest Road project, okay, in which we're going to widen Hillcrest Road, and you can see it's a wider section than what's existing out there right now, which is basically 2 lanes of traffic. So we're gonna actually widen it, and above the portal to the west side of it, we'll probably take a lane. So this will be mostly at grade alignment also. Segment 3 is for West Side Bridges, and there is really no change to the West Side Bridges project except restriping. And just for continuation from the Hillcrest project, as the bicyclists and pedestrians, reach this particular location, there will be a crosswalk, and they'll continue on their multi-use path on the shoulder of the West Side Bridges project that we're striping in. And again, this is mostly at grade. Segment 4 is all the way to the McCullough Road intersection, in which we are looking at continuing this at grade alignment. There may be possible widening of this segment. This is something that we are still exploring. Let me go over the preliminary funding for this project. the total project costs that we're looking at, this is for preliminary engineering, design, and construction. We're looking at $78.8 million. Design is, well, let me go back a little. Preliminary engineering is roughly $2 million. Design is about $6.8 million, and we estimate very early on that construction will cost roughly about $70 million. We expect this to come from a variety of funding sources, in which we're looking at federal and state funding, and also some regional funding. This is a map that you've seen this map before of all the projects out there. And I just want to highlight that, for the YBI multi-use pathway project, we are this orange path that's on the outside of all the other projects along Treasure Island and Hillcrest. This, of course, includes the West Side Bridges, the Hillcrest Road and Southgate projects. And our timeline, we're hoping to get out to construction by 2025 to take advantage of the other projects. And this concludes my presentation, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Let's open up to questions for members. Member Siegel or Vice Chair Siegel.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to say I'm excited to see this link go in, having tried to navigate this area as a pedestrian. It is pretty harrowing right now, and it seems like a really crucial missing pedestrian and bicycle link between the East Bay and the Treasure Island transit options to the city. So thank you, and excited to see this move forward.
Great, thank you, Vice Chair Siegel. Do we have any other questions for members? Member Bars.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. I also want to say that I am very much in support of this project in concept. It seems like a great link. I have spent time on Treasure Island and Yerba Buena, where it can be quite confusing. So I agree with Vice Chair Siegel. However, I can't help but notice it is a $80 million multi-use bike path. Can you give me a sense of what the major cost drivers are for this? And also, can you tell me the length of the bike path and any information about the number of people who we anticipate will use it?
Thank you, Member Boris. The estimated length of the bike path is roughly about 1.2 miles. Okay. We're actually getting a good number of bicyclists and pedestrians that's coming on the east span of the Bay Bridge. Okay, and we have received a lot of comments, just about putting in a lot of these safety features that are out there. Okay, we do expect that with the continued development of Treasure Island and Yerba Buena Island, the ferry services that's running, that eventually there will be a very high number of users for this particular path, right? Not just from people coming in from the East Bay, but also all the future residents. And since there are not a lot of existing sidewalks and bike path out there, so this is something that we're trying to be very proactive about. And one of the drivers for the high cost is actually the very challenging site conditions out there. If it was just like a flat area, it would be much easier to construct. But we have very, very challenging grade situation at that location, in which that may require a lot of excavation. There are certain areas in which the soil may not be as stable. Okay, so that does require a lot of soil testing and also additional foundation work. And due to a lot of the constraint, we may need to actually also possibly widen part of Treasure Island Road and Hillcrest Road. Okay, so even though it's just a path, due to a lot of the space constraint out there, that is forcing a lot of actual additional engineering work.
Okay, it's a bike path, but it's a bike path like on the side of a hill. And I think that's fundamentally, yeah, okay.
Do we have any other questions, comments from members? I see a couple hands just pop up. Member Ortega?
Hi, yes, just adding on to Member Bars's question. I have not tried to bike around Treasure Island, but are there other existing bike paths that exist that will be connected up to this? I'm sorry, that wasn't very clear to me for this mile stretch.
Okay, thank you, Member Ortega, for that question. Currently on the island itself, there are really very limited bike path out there. On Color Road, the developer is putting in a bike path at the moment. Okay, so that project is still being approved, being finalized. Construction is more or less done, but I think there's still some finishing touches out there. However, on McCullough Road, that particular path, we're looking at grades of up to 20%. So it's actually pretty steep. And there are very limited access point along other locations. What we are looking at putting in for the Hillcrest and Church Island Road is a slightly more gentle slope so that it will be easier. And hopefully we can meet ADA requirements.
Okay, thank you. I'm just trying to understand how the path then connects in to the rest, but I'll go take a look at the plans and send a question in after this meeting, I think. Thanks.
Thank you, Member Ortega. Do we have any other questions from members? Seeing none, let's open it up for public comment.
Checking for public comment. And there is no public comment for item 11.
Great, this item is now closed. Thank you so much, Mike, for your presentation. So now let's jump on to item number 12, which is the introduction of new business. Do we have any CAC members that have any new business items? Member Levine?
Yeah, sorry, I was on mute. I wanted to follow up on an ongoing issue that community member Ed Mason has had regarding those buses that are not meeting or following some of the guidelines, or in some cases not even being licensed. I think it's about time that the SFMTA came to respond directly to his concerns. I mean, he's been going through this almost constantly for well over a year, I think, documenting the problems with the buses. And it would be really great to have someone from the SFMTA respond directly, because I'm sure his concerns, and I know mine as well, and possibly some other members of our committee have issues with it. So I'd like to have a representative from the SFMTA come and speak to his concerns and see what can be done to respond basically to what he's been going through for the last year. Thank you.
Thank you, Member Levine. And I think, can we, Maria, if you're on, is there any way we can get a presentation on that next month? Representative.
Thank you, Chair Ortiz. Let me check. Part of the issue has just been sewer past 8 again, so we're worried about how long you're able to stay to put this on. But let me reach out and find out when their staff is available to come and present to you. I will.
Okay. Yeah, I'd like to maybe have, since this has been going on for a year, within the next 2 meetings, preferably. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Do we have any other introduction of items from members? Seeing none, let's move to public comment.
Checking for public comments and being one public comment for item 11. Try to unmute. Caller, can you please unmute with star
Yes, I'm
6?
here.
Oh, yes, okay, thank you. 2 minutes.
Hi,
will
good
start
evening.
Now, yes,
Can you hear me?
yes, we can hear you. Go ahead.
Okay, wonderful. Yeah, this is Edward Mason. Thank you very much. I've been following this for almost a decade, and then the program became finalized around 2017. I've been photographing, and I've got like 8,000 photos, and I have to download those off the cell phone. But the bottom line is, yes, there are certainly violations, and a lot of these bus providers are not paying the freight they're supposed to be paying, and there's a lack of enforcement, especially now during the COVID, because there's a lack of parking traffic control officers. They have taxi inspectors 1 day a week out here for an hour issuing a citation or so, but the rest of the time it's a free ride. So I agree that there needs to be some adherence to the regulations, and also these buses, if you look at them, they're basically operating empty now as a result of the COVID. Only in my observation, Apple and Genentech, may fill a bus, but the rest of the buses going to Redwood City and Sunnyvale and all the other places are basically empty. If you look at it, and you can see through the smoked windows if you position yourself with the sunrise will pierce the smoked windows, and you can see that there are no heads on the headrests. So yeah, it's a problem, and there's a lot of congestion along 24th Street where you've got these buses coming down, and you got the garbage truck, you got the delivery truck. They impede Muni, and my position is, since Caltrain's ridership is only about 1/3 of what it was.
Thank you, caller. Your time is
all
up.
right.
Thank you so much for your
Thank
comment.
you.
Great. Do you have any other public comment?
Checking for additional public comment, and no additional public comment.
Great. Let's close public comment. And I think if we don't have any other questions from members, we're going to adjourn the meeting, which is great. I tried to keep it as quickly as.
Chair, we still need a general public comment.
Oh, general public comment. Yes. And I see a hand came up.
Okay, caller. Oh, we have 2 hands that have come up. So 3 more hands trickling in. Okay, we'll start with Roland. Go ahead. Your 2 minutes begins now.
Thank you, and I believe we are on item 13 right now. So thank you for the countdown clock. Much appreciated. Mine is stuck at 2 minutes. This is really helpful. I have another small ask, which is whether it would be possible to enable the save transcript button, because the only way I have to capture the transcript right now is to take a screenshot. So that would be really helpful. But the last thing I'd like to do is to circle back to a question I asked earlier through the chair, and I apologize if I made any breach of protocol. So I would appreciate if someone could reach out to me offline and let me know if I could ask the question in some other way. Thank you and good night.
Thank you for your comment. Taking call-in user 2 for public comment. I believe you'll have to dial *6 to unmute yourself. There we go. And your 2 minutes starts now.
Yeah, thank you very much. This is Edward Mason again regarding the corporate commuter buses, and my only comment is the amount of congestion that you have, delays to Muni. No one wants to recognize those because the corporate influence through the Bay Area Council and the Silicon Valley Leadership Group are very powerful interests, and they really, want to have this as a feature. But now with the COVID situation and the 3-day a week, you can just monitor anywhere where, before COVID, there were 42 buses at 24th and Church between 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning. They authorized 100 buses at 24th and Church in the morning between 6 and 10, okay? 100, that's 100 Greyhound buses coming through your neighborhood. So, they've totally disregarded any impact or impression on the neighborhood. You walk, you can ask any neighbor here, and it's all a negative comment regarding the buses. And they do delay Muni. 24th Street narrows east of Dolores Street, and inevitably, if there's buses going either way, Muni is delayed because they have to, kind of pull over at either San Jose or Chattanooga and the different streets and Fair Oaks. So I think there really needs to be an evaluation on this, and the default program was, well, the buses, otherwise people, if the buses weren't there, people would drive. Well, the young people rent their transportation. They don't buy their transportation via vehicle. And so that argument now turns around where these buses are really a net generator
Thank you,
of
caller.
pollution.
30, your
Yeah,
2
thank
minutes
you.
is up. Thank you so much.
Okay. Good
Okay.
night.
Good night. And one more public comment from Hillary Brown. Hillary, go ahead. Your 2 minutes will start now. Get the clock. Okay. Go ahead. Great. All right. Go ahead, Hillary Brown. Oh.
And I'm interested in becoming a member of this committee. For the past 5 years, I've served as the Municipal Accessibility Access Committee for SFCTA. And after being here for like 2 hours, I developed interest in joining this committee. I would like to know the process of applying. Like, for example, do I need to attend additional meetings to be qualified to apply? And that was my question.
Hi, Ms. Hillary Brown, Elijah Clerk here. Right now is the time for members of the public to make comment on anything that might fall under the purview of the TA. Not time for a back and forth. However, I can reach out to you sometime tomorrow or later this week if you would send me an email at clerk@sfcta.org. Or you can call our general line and someone will be able to get me in touch with you.
I left my email on the chat. Is that adequate? That's adequate. That's in the chat.
Yeah, the chat is unfortunately closed to members of the public. It's just the way that we have the settings on Zoom set up for these meetings. But if you find our general line, our phone number for that CTA, give us a call and someone will put me in contact with you.
No problem.
All right.
Great. Do we have any other members of the public?
Checking for, no additional public comment for this item. Thank you.
Great. We are just a little bit over 35 minutes of our meeting with the PAC agenda. I think we did okay. And I know there was a lot of engaged public comment. So I just want to thank everyone for the members of the public specifically for participating, as well as for members for really keeping this a really tight meeting and going from there. One thing I will say though, I would love to meet with all of you individually within your districts, just learn about transportation within your districts. So please reach out to me. I'd love to schedule meetings and coffees within your districts to really kind of learn about how transportation really impacts your neighborhoods. So Thanks so much, everyone. I really appreciate your time, and this meeting is now adjourned.
Thank you. You did a really good job holding the meeting together. This is great. And I know I look forward to meeting so many of you new people who will be on the committee next month. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
One second.
you.
Will we be getting information on where to go since it's,
Yes,
I think several, okay, perfect. I'm
for
like, I don't
sure.
know where to go next month.
No worries. We'll help you out. It's going to be a whole new world.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks.
Thanks a
Will there
lot.
be a little, will there be a celebration of the
Yes.
end of Prop K?
End of Prop
Yes.
K. Welcome back, CAC. We'll have a little mini party.
And I understand there'll be
Sounds fun.
food, right?
Correct. Yeah.
Great.
Thanks.
Wish the
Good
cat
night.
Thank you.
could come too. Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.